me to the stage.
Hello, guests, parents, and fellow delegates. Another amazing year of LCM has flown us by. A year where we have learned not only to negotiate, but where we've learned to implement hilarious jokes in many of our speeches. Learned to think of resolutions on some of the most pressing issues today. And most importantly, learned to polish our values as human beings. We laughed, we shared stories, and we had a lot of fun. And I gathered many unique experiences that I had only gathered at a place like LCM. When I first walked onto the MUN stage 2 years ago, I was a small, high-pitched 8th grader with a bare-bones understanding of what the word diplomacy meant. Now, if you had asked me then, I would have just said, well, why don't you just tell the opposing party to chill out? But it isn't quite that simple, is it? As many of us soon learned. And after attending multiple conferences in my first year with LCM, I witnessed that diplomacy is not just about strong-arming one's own idea on your opponent, nor is it about conceding one's own belief to arrive at a fair trade-off. Instead, diplomacy is about listening to what others have to say and understanding where they are coming from. It is about empathizing with not only one's own role as a delegate, but being able to listen to others around you at the negotiation table. With that all, it still seems as if we could never read enough or listen to enough from our research on any crisis at hand to fully ever prepare for a diplomacy session. How could we ever truly understand our opponent's plight to negotiate fairly when we don't often live their suffering, or simply put, feel their pain? I'd like to take a moment to share with you an amazing encounter I had with a real-life casualty of a failed diplomacy. A month ago, I was assigned an English class project in commemorating the 70th anniversary of the end of World War II, the bloodiest war in the history of mankind, which took the lives of some 85 million people worldwide. My job was to locate and interview a person who had had a first-hand experience of the war. And I came upon a small and gentle Dutch woman by the name of Mrs. Saitow. She is now 94 years old and is currently living in the United States. She often forgets where she places her purse nowadays, but otherwise, she is a perfectly wonderful and healthy human being. Mrs. Saitow and her family once lived on the island of Java, Indonesia. And the island of Java had been a Dutch colony for over 300 years at the time. Her grandfather and her family had moved to Indonesia from Europe to manage a plantation on the island. She was merely 10 years old when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor on December 7th of 1941. More than anything, Mrs. Saitow was afraid that the war would spread to her own peaceful island and destroy not only her school life, but also her everyday life with friends and family. The island would soon suffer relentless air raids by the Japanese Air Force as they prepared to invade the island. Her very own playroom was soon turned into a makeshift bomb shelter where she would sit for hours on end with rubber in her teeth, cotton swabs in her ears, and an iron walk over her head to reduce shock from falling bombs. It was a painful sight to see her father drafted into the Dutch Royal Army to fight the Japanese aggression. He was later captured and unfortunately died just before the end of the war. Mrs. Saitao and her family were eventually rounded up by the Japanese and forced into a concentration camp, where for the next 3.5 years endured hellish and inhumane treatments at the hands of the invaders. The experience completely interrupted her childhood and forever scarred her. My fellow delegates, though we are just trainees now, our words, as eloquent as they be, may not yet move the earth or muffle any guns. But let me tell you, someday they will. For many of us in this room, we will someday come back to those grand hotels from our past conferences, not as mere actors in a crisis, but as real-life representatives of an entire people. Our words will tilt the balance of war and with peace, and have a real-life effect on real people. Now, I'm not trivializing diplomacy by any means, for we have all experienced it. Diplomacy is hard to achieve, very, very hard. And there really isn't a panacea for successful diplomacy that I'm aware of, nor one that Simon or Katerina can teach us. But what I do know, fellow delegates, is that when we fail at diplomacy, we fail the human hearts and scar them for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you.